Hi, Schaeffer team. This is Gary Johnson from the home office in St. Louis coming to you today to talk about one of the most impactful, powerful tools and resources that all of us have, and that is our time. Before we jump into today's webinar, which will be part of a series of webinars that I'll be bringing to you, I wanted to introduce myself to you. Again, my name is Gary Johnson. I work with Steve Brewer and Steve Rober in the home office and am new to the company. To give you some background on me, I've spent about 25 years in sales and sales leadership. During that time, I've spent over 5 years as a Lone Ranger like you. In that particular function, I was running a sales and leadership management training company, my own company, out of the basement of my home. And I would call on CEOs and presidents and talk to them about having me come in and do training for their sales teams, their customer service teams, management teams, etc. So that was my background. I hold 2 master's degrees. I have an MBA and a master's in management, and I wrote a book on the topic WOW'd, how to use the principles of WOW to create incredible customer service. In fact, that's how I was introduced to Schaeffer. I came in and did one of those web seminars, live seminars. It went over really well, and from that, one thing led to the other, and I was asked to join your team, which I'm very humbled about. I think it's a fantastic organization. So that being said, I want to go ahead and jump in. I want to talk about, as a Lone Ranger, as a professional salesperson, in an environment in which our culture is one in which we're not going to be calling you every day asking how you're doing. Time can slip away from you very, very quickly, and we really need to be careful of that. So I wanted to start this seminar slash webinar series with time because I think it's such an important point, and many research studies have been done showing that it's the #1 factor, wasting of time, that cause salespeople to not be as successful as they would like. So let's go ahead and jump into this and get started. We've got 3 main things I want to cover today. One, I want you, after this webinar, to covet your round to it. And I'm going to tell you what that means as we go. We're also going to talk about using a system, and whether your system is as I was in a meeting recently with the Weises, and Don Jr. was sitting on one side of the table, and his son Don the third was on the other, and he gave everybody was in there with their surfaces and computers, and Don Jr. was given his iPad, which was a legal pad. He said, "Here's your iPad." So whether you're using that type of a system, which works really well, there's nothing wrong with writing things down, whether that's a Franklin Covey planner or a notepad or a legal pad, or you're using today's most modern technology, you've got to use a system. So make sure that you're doing that. Third point we're going to get into today, are you spending enough time prospecting and serving? Are you doing that enough? We can get lulled into sleep here if we're not careful. So those are the things we're going to jump into today. And I want to go ahead and start with, as you're probably asking yourself, what in the heck is around to it? How many times have we said to ourselves, I'm going to get to that customer on the other side of town when I get around to it? Or I'm going to learn that piece of technology when I get around to it. Or I'm going to look at that new ag channel product line. Or I'm going to maybe think about Wetzel when I get around to it. All of us know that procrastination is one of the greatest dangers we have in sales. We have the tendency, just like any other human, but even in sales more so, tendency to put things off that are uncomfortable, put things off that are in the unknown or that we fear. And I'm going to challenge you today not to do that. I'm going to challenge you to stay focused on getting through things, especially those things that make you uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, it's going to make you a much better salesperson. Procrastination by itself can debilitate a salesperson faster than anything I've ever seen. This procrastinating situation, what it does is, when we procrastinate, when we put something off that we really know we should be doing, it really creates a lot of guilt and anxiety in us about getting things done that we know we should get done. And what it does is it puts us in a negative frame of mind. And the last thing we want to have in sales is a negative frame of mind. It can impact everything from our body language to the way we are coming off with potential prospects or customers, our ability or willingness to get other things done, or to make the phone calls we know we need to make, or do the prospecting we know we need to do. Be very careful of this. And procrastination in itself can cause this guilt and anxiety. So I'm going to challenge all of you out in the audience that at the end of this webinar, if you do one thing, is you commit to not procrastinating. It's such an important component of success is avoiding procrastination. There's a book that was written by Jane Burka. She's an expert on this topic. She wrote a book called Procrastination: Why You Do It and What to Do About It. And here's what she said about it. She was really kind of getting into human dynamics here, and kind of why we do what we do. And based on her research, she found it's, as humans, it's easier for us to believe we failed at something by, quote, putting it off, than because we lack the ability to achieve it. It's much easier on our egos to say, well, I didn't have that success because I really didn't commit to it, or I really didn't put in the time, or I really never got around to it. It's much easier on our egos for that to happen. This is a whole separate webinar I'm getting ready to talk about. But fear of failure, that is something we've got to overcome. Failures, and you can talk to the Donald Trumps of the world and the Arnold Schwarzeneggers of the world. You name the industry, you name the person that's had success, and they'll all tell you the same thing. The greatest success they've had in their life has been from learning from those failures they had, not their successes, but their failures. So we're going to talk about that on a whole separate webinar of getting past your fear of failure. But I want to bring it up as it relates to this because it relates to Jane's point. And Jane's point is, hey, we would rather put things off than fail at them because we didn't have the ability. It's better on our egos, and we need to get past that. We need to try our best at those things, especially those things that we know can make us better. And I thought she brought up a really, really good point in her book. Here are 5 key elements that I want to get into with you on how to avoid procrastination. And believe me, there's way more than 5. There's probably 100 ways to avoid procrastination. But as you know, having that many ideas, you end up chasing all kinds of rabbits. It's just not a real positive way to get better. It's easier just to narrow things down to just a few things you can remember. And so I've narrowed this down to what I think are 5 really key elements that all of us can use to help avoid procrastination. Number 1 is this: break calling. And I'm using calling as the example because I think it's the one area that all salespeople, no matter how good they are, most salespeople, at least most, struggle with this. We struggle to motivate ourselves to do it. And I'm going to suggest to you to break your calling into 45-minute or 1-hour segments, and then reward yourself for achieving a certain goal in that time frame with a cup of coffee or doing something for a few minutes that you really enjoy. I know when I was a Lone Ranger, when I was making these calls into CEOs and presidents that, quite honestly, just like Schaeffer, they didn't know me from Adam. I mean, they didn't know who I was, what I had was good. And so I had to really trick myself into making those calls that I knew that I need to make. But here's the point, ladies and gentlemen, and you guys need to know this too. This is a separate webinar. But once you know your statistics, once you know what your results are, you can use that to force yourself to do things you don't like to do. Let me give you an example. I knew in my business, my little workout of my basement business, that if I sent out 10 prospecting letters to qualified prospects, people I've done the research on and knew were good prospects, if I sent 10 of those out, I would get 3.5 was the average, 3.5 out of 10 that would take my phone call when I followed up. I put a little something clever in there. For example, in fact, how I got in front of Schaeffer, I took a $2 bill and I put my business card on the back of it and I laminated it. And I wrote a letter that said something like, great customer service, or $2 bills isn't something you see every day, and neither is great customer service. I'd like to come tell you how I can help improve yours, blah, 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 something like that. When I would send that letter out, I'd send 10 of them. 3.5 of those prospects would take my phone call. They'd have the $2 bill on their desk. They say, oh yeah, I got your call or your letter. That was great. Tell me about your company, or yeah, I'll give you a few minutes. And from there, I would make my feed, or give them my feedback on what it is I did and how I could help them. So once I sent 10 letters, I knew the 3.5 would take my call. Of those 3.5 that would take my call, I knew that 2 out of those 3.5 would schedule to let me come in and talk to them in more depth and do a free seminar for their leadership team. That was kind of my angle. I'd do a free seminar for them. I ran for 2 straight years. If I got 2 prospects to let me come in and do a free webinar for 2 straight years, I didn't miss a one of them. I closed every one of them for 2 years. And my average sale was $12,400. So what am I saying all this for? Because I knew my numbers well enough to know that if I was getting challenged because my month wasn't going as well as I wanted it to go, or things weren't going where I wanted to, all I had to do was do things right, send my 10 letters out, and in those 10 letters was $24,800, and I just needed to do the work to get it done. So why do I bring it up here? Because it was a good reminder for me when I would sit down, and I was never super excited to make those phone calls or do the prospecting that I knew that I had to do until I reminded myself that there were $28,000 or $24,000 plus of business in every one of those 10 letters that I would get out. So please, please figure out a way to trick yourself, coax yourself into making these calls, because at the end of the day, there's money in there. And we all know that. You just need to know your statistics and use that as a way, or use like I did, a cup of coffee. Hey, if I got X number of calls done in an hour, I'd go get a cup of coffee, or I'd do something that I really enjoyed. So I spent a lot of time on this, but I think it's a really, really important point. Number 2 in the 5 ways to avoid procrastination is schedule specific time for tasks you usually avoid. For example, set identifying 10 prospects up every Wednesday before you can do something else as a goal. So when I'm talking about identifying here, I'm really talking about the true prospecting, where you're narrowing down those people that you're going to call on that fit a certain niche, or they fit your model, or they look to be good clients based on your past experience. But this identifying is the process that you would go by to say, yep, these people are a prospect. They're a certain size, they have a certain type of equipment, blah, blah, blah. That's another one of those areas that we avoid, or we don't do it as good of a job of it as we need to. And this is what will fill your pipeline. These are the behaviors, the activities we must do to get in front of those people that we can then do the demo on or show our wonderful products to. But if I don't identify the right people first, I could spend a lot of time, or waste a lot of time, with people that really aren't good prospects. So this is a really good point too, and that's schedule the time. Every Wednesday from 9 to noon, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get 10 prospects identified. If you do that every week, that's 40 a month. You're going to be in really good shape. So anyway, just wanted to use that to make that point. I think it's really, really important. Number 3 in the 5 ways to avoid procrastination: don't let unpleasant jobs age and pile up. And this is a big deal, and you probably are starting to notice a pattern here. A lot of the times we procrastinate, not all the time, but a lot of the times it's because things we either don't like to do, or that they're not pleasant. Let me give you an example of why this is so important, because your subconscious will do this to you and you don't even know it. There was a study done, and it was in one of Gallup's book. I don't know if it was in First Break All the Rules or the 12 Great Elements of Management. It was one of their books. Anyway, they talked about a study where a particular professor, and I can't remember where it was at, Midwest University somewhere, had a big lecture hall, and he had a tendency to pace back and forth in his lectures. Well, anyway, one particular day he was late to class, maybe about 10 minutes or so, and it's a big lecture hall. There was probably over 150 kids in the room, and as he would pace from the left side of the room to the right side of the room, nobody would laugh at his jokes. No one was asking questions. The audience, the class, didn't seem to be engaged. When he would leave that side of the stage, or front of the classroom, and move over to the left side, everybody was engaged. The body language was such that he could tell they were interested. They would ask questions. They would laugh at his jokes. By the end of that 60-minute lecture, do you know where he was standing? He was standing on the left side of the classroom and no longer pacing. When class ended, one of the students in the class said, "Professor, I want to let you know we did a little experiment on you. I have a paper due next week, and I asked the class, since you were late, to ignore you when you went to one side of the room and pay tons of attention to you went to the other, to see what impact positive reinforcement would have on your behavior." What's the point, ladies and gentlemen? He didn't even know he was standing on the left side of the room. Your brain will move you towards those things that feels is pleasant, and move you away from those things that it feels are unpleasant. So guard against this when it comes to those behaviors, those activities you need to do to be successful. Please make sure that you are aware of this. It's really, really important. Okay, number 4 in this whole process of avoiding procrastination is make tasks you avoid more pleasant. So I just gave you an example of how they did this with the professor. but you've got to do this for yourself. So once you're aware that you have the potential to avoid it or procrastinate on it, do some things that will help you eliminate that. For example, let me give you a classic example. One of my greatest fears when I was running my little small business was getting in front of my prospect and not knowing what I was going to say, or fumbling around, or not having a concise and clear message. So what I did to eliminate that fear is I took a tape recorder, digital tape recorder, and I wrote out a script. I wrote out a script of exactly what I was going to say to the CEO. And then I recorded it exactly perfectly. And then I would listen to it over and over and over again, to the point where I could stop the recorder and I could spit out the next sentence on that recorder, and then I would restart it to see if I got it right. I became so comfortable at this that when you put me in front of a CEO or a president, they could move me all over the place. They could try to throw me off my game. They could interrupt me. They could do all kinds of stuff. And I was like a tape recorder. I just go right back to my point. So I eliminated this unpleasantry for me, which was going in and not feeling like I was prepared. And now I couldn't wait to go get in front of the customer. I couldn't wait to get in front of that CEO, where before I was scared of it. So that's a point. Make tasks you avoid more pleasant. Do something, whether that's eliminating a fear, whether that's preparing yourself, whether that's rewarding yourself. Figure out a way to motivate yourself to do this. Number 5, in ways to avoid procrastination, don't anticipate how prospects will respond. We are so guilty of this, right? We prejudge all the time, and we end up costing ourselves and our families lots of money. You've all heard the story of the 2 Rolls-Royce salesmen, true story, in Indiana, that were standing in the showroom talking, and a gentleman came in and didn't look like he had 2 nickels to rub together. He had old blue jeans on, old t-shirt, and the one salesman wanted nothing to do with him and ignored him. The other salesman decided to go up and interact with him, and come to find out after doing so, he found out it was Eli Lilly, and he bought 2 Rolls Royces and paid cash, one for his wife and one for himself. So be really, really careful of this. We've got our own great story in Schaeffer. You guys have all heard the story of the Weises, and you've heard this story told by Steve Brewer or other people, where the late Don Weiss, and what I understand, was just a wonderful man. I wish I would have had a chance to meet him. But he and Don Jr. were at a very, very wealthy person's home. They knocked on the door. The gentleman came to the door and screamed and yelled at him and threatened him and told him to get off the porch and don't come back and don't you read signs. And instead of leaving, they walked around the back of the house and knocked on the back door. And the gentleman who answered was so upset, so aggravated, so shocked that they were there. He said, "Didn't you hear me when I told you at the front not to come back here? What are you doing here?" And they said something to the effect, or Don did, that, "Hey, I just wanted to see if the guy at the back door was any friendlier than the guy at the front door." Well, it broke the ice. He laughed. He let him in the house. He asked them what they had to sell, and they became really, really good clients. Just remember that when we anticipate how a prospect will respond, it can cause us to procrastinate calling on a customer that could end up being one of your biggest, best customers. Please, please avoid doing that. Another pain reason, another pain that comes up as to why we procrastinate, I'm going to challenge you to avoid it. Last thing, because you're on this webinar, because you've watched this, I'm going to give you your very own round to it. So it's a wooden round to it. All you have to do is email me and I will send you one. And this is what it says. It says, "This is a round to it. Guard it with your life. Two-its are hard to come by, especially the round ones. It will help you become a much more successful person." For years, you've heard people say, "I'll do this when I get a round to it." Now that you have one, you can accomplish all things you put aside until you got this round to it. So just shoot me an email. It's right here on the PowerPoint. It's gjohnson@Schaeffer Oil. I'll be glad to send you one. By the way, they are wonderful icebreakers with customers. They're really fun, and people really have get a kick out of them. So the second principle I wanted to cover today, we talked about earlier, was a system, right? Having a system. And one of the best ways to avoid wasting time is just that, is to put yourself into a system. Whether, as I mentioned earlier, you're using a legal pad or a Franklin Covey daily planner where you're handwriting things out, or you're using today's most advanced technology, you've got to be using a system to help keep you organized and keep you focused. Don Hudson, and many of you were introduced to him through a series of webinars that he had done for Schaeffer some time back, talked about scheduling time this way. He said you have A, B, C, and D time. He said A time is your critical time. This is the time in front of your customer or prospect. And when he says in front of, he either means by the phone, in person, or online. And it is really, really important time. He said your B time is the time you spend learning to be more productive at your A time. What you're doing right now is B time. You're learning ways to be better at your A time. He said C time is all those other things in business that we have to do that don't necessarily result in a sale. Paperwork, expense reports, driving to a client's, etc. Those kind of things, they have to be done, but that's C time. D time is your personal time. And here's the point here, all you workaholics out there in the audience, we've got to make sure that we're spending time with our families, right? We don't want to create, mother wounds or father wounds or husband wounds or wife wounds or boyfriend or girlfriend wounds. We need to make sure we're balanced. Every great sales professional will tell you if you don't have balance in your life, spiritual balance, all those things we need to have, you've got to have this in your life in order for you to be long-term successful. So just think about that. Using a CRM, I know many of you in the audience know what that is. It's just a contact management system. And there are many out there. There's Salesforce, there's Insightly. And by the way, Insightly is free. This is a system that you can go online and get it for free. The only person to be able to access your database will be you with your password. But you can put your contacts in here. The free one, Insightly, I think it limits you to 500 or 600 contacts or something like that. But this is a tool that will definitely help make you much more organized. You can put notes in about the last time you called on them. You can put in birth dates. You can set alarms. It's a really, really powerful thing. If you are not about a CRM and you would rather put these in a Rolodex or whatever, great. Whatever works for you. But you've got to have a system. One of the best salespeople I ever saw used a Rolodex. I mean, and he knew everything. He put his notes in there. If that's your thing, that's great. But I think we have to be using something to stay organized. And CRMs are great for that. They let you put really copious notes in there and put alarms and follow up and that type of a thing. Here we go with routine again. I'm talking routine. I talked about CRM. I've talked about systems. Have a routine. When I was running my small little business out of my basement, I had to have a routine to trigger me to work. So what I would do is every morning at 8 a.m. I was dressed for business. And for me, for business would be, even though I'd be working out of my house, I'd put on a sport coat and a pair, even if I had blue jeans on. I always felt like, because of the type of business I was in, that if I had a sport coat on and my jeans on and whatever, I was ready to go to work. And I would leave the house and I would go and get a coffee, whether it was a McDonald's. I think initially a McDonald's, that eventually they put up a Starbucks close to my house. But anyway, the point is I would go at 8 o'clock, I'd go through the drive-thru, I'd get my coffee, and as soon as I hit the garage door button and walked into my house, I was in the office. That was my mental trigger that I was to go to work, and it worked really, really well for me. So think about that. Here's another thing to consider when you're thinking about your routine. Get into routines with those activities you know are going to make you successful. Some of the best advice I was ever given was by a close friend of Zig Ziglar's and a superstar salesman named John Krause. And here's what he said. He said, you cannot manage your results. Can't do it. But you can manage your activities. Do that well and results will take care of themselves. So whatever those activities are that we know are going to lead to success, filling our pipeline, identifying prospects, following up on prospects, following up on those people that we've made calls to, doing demos, all the things we know that are going to lead to our success, you've absolutely got to plan for those. If you don't, you're actually failing to plan, and that's, you know what that means. It's not good. So really, really important point. Please think about that as you are planning for your future. Last point. Prospecting, serving. You heard me talk about this as the last point, and I want to make this because I think it's really important. There are a lot of you sitting out there in the audience, because I've met a lot of you that have been with Schaeffer for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years and have had a great deal of success. Well, congratulations. That's awesome. That's the great thing about this company and about this culture. But please be careful, because success can be paralyzing. Don't let it lull you to sleep. I've seen so many successful people get into a habit where things were going really well and they quit filling their pipeline, and then something changed in the economy or with the particular industry they were calling on, and they were hanging on barely, trying to figure out what they were going to do to keep their income where they needed it. Be diversified. If there's one thing I would tell you, it's be diversified. Of course you want a niche. I had a niche. One of my niches when I was selling leadership training and customer service training was credit unions. I did really, really good with them, but they weren't my only customer. They were one of 3 or 4 customer or industries that I called on. For us at Schaeffer, be diversified. Have farmers, have industrial customers, trucking companies. Have a diverse group of people that you can call on so that you can protect yourself from one particular area or industry from falling down. So just remember that too many eggs in one basket can come back and bite you. I just want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to visit with you today. I'm looking forward to becoming your friend and being a resource that you can call upon to help make you better. We all should be very humbled to be working for such a wonderful company and be thankful every day. I know I am. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week, your month, your day. I look forward to seeing you next time.